Hello, everyone, and welcome to the PharmAla Biotech webinar talking about treating patients with MDMA through the Special Access Program. I'm Nick Kadish. I'm the founding CEO of PharmAla, coming to you live from a Via Rail train somewhere between Scarborough and the city of Toronto. We have three wonderful panelists with us today who have generously given their time in order to talk about treating patients with MDMA through special access. I'm going to introduce them in a moment. But first, I'll say a few words about PharmAla. PharmAla is an MDMA company. We are currently the only manufacturers of clinical grade MDMA in Canada. And I feel very honored, frankly, and blessed to be able to sit here with you all and to be able to say that we have now been treating patients since May of this year through SAP, along with some of the folks on this call today. It really is, to my mind, quite an honor to be able to help people in this way, and it's very rare that we get to do this. It's sort of one of the unique facets of the broader psychedelics industry. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our panelists. First up, Dr. Monika Hooper, who will be talking about the application process and moving through the SAP on the Health Canada side. Born in Saskatoon, Dr. Monika Hooper studied linguistics at UBC and received her medical degree from the University of Alberta in Edmonton. She returned to Saskatoon to complete her psychiatry residency and began her practice by working with acute care patients at both Saskatoon's Dubé Centre and the emergency room at the Royal University Hospital. After several years working in acute care, Dr. Hooper co-founded the Linden Medical Center with the goal of being able to offer modern treatments for psychiatric illness that are difficult to access in Saskatchewan. So we'll welcome Monika in just a moment. After that, we're going to have Dr. Leora Pinhas talk about the actual treatment process, what it's like leading up to and on the day of an SAP treatment with MDMA. Dr. Pinhas is a psychiatrist with a subspecialty in child and adolescent psychiatry and a fellowship in women's mental health and eating disorders. She developed the first day treatment program and the first residential program for adolescents with eating disorders in Canada, and has published on eating disorders in academic journals. She started working with ketamine-assisted therapy while working at Field Trip, and now is in private practice and works with painless medicine with a focus on psychedelic treatment of mental health disorders. Welcome, Dr. Pinhas. Finally, our last panelist today is Spencer Hawkswell. Spencer is the president and chief executive officer of Theracell, a charity focused on expanding psychedelic treatments. Spencer is going to talk a little bit about a program recently announced by Theracell to train therapists in how to perform MDMA-assisted psychotherapy, both through the SAP and hopefully beyond. Spencer was first introduced to healing psychological trauma with altered states of consciousness and therapeutic psychedelics from reading the works of Terence McKenna, Rick Strassman, and Carl Jung, and believes that these methods need to be treated seriously by governments and institutions. Spencer believes that responsible drug policy requires effective organization and leadership, and is dedicated to bringing together the experts and advocates to facilitate change that results in increased access to compassionate care, harm reduction, and treatment options for those in need. So with that, I will introduce Dr. Monika Hooper to talk about the application process for MDMA-assisted therapy through SAP.
Thank you so much, Nick. So do you guys want me to talk about the SAP process or answer questions?
I think walk folks through the process. Just if you found any challenges, what those challenges were, and then we can take questions at the end, I think, on all of these topics.
Okay, sure. Can you pull up the template? Okay, awesome. So this is the template of the Special Access Program, and it's found on the Health Canada website. It's titled the Form A, and the first section you have to put in your practitioner information, so your name, the clinic number, the clinic name, your address, the city, telephone number, all of that, and then where the patient is going to, where the manufacturer is going to mail the medication to. Usually I would have it mailed to my practitioner's office, but it can also be sent to a pharmacy or a government agency depot. I've never had that done. I've only had it ever sent to my office. And I filled these out for both psilocybin as well as MDMA. Can you go to the next? Yeah, that's perfect. So this is just drug and manufacturer information that I was sent. So I've used Filament for psilocybin and PharmAla for MDMA. And then they just provided this information about their name and location and the trade name of the medicine. So this is a section where if you're getting a transfer of supply, so you've already gotten a supply for a patient, but they haven't used it, then you can ask to transfer it, but I haven't filled that out yet. I've done it once for psilocybin, but never for MDMA. And then this is information about the patient. So you would never put in information, their full name. It would just be their initials and then their date of birth and what kind of indication you're using. So for psilocybin, I've used it for treatment-resistant major depressive disorder. It has also been approved for end-of-life anxiety, but I've never filled in a SAP application for end-of-life anxiety. And then for MDMA, it is indicated for PTSD. And they ask for the dosage. So the dosage is 100 that I've used is 120 milligrams with 40 milligram top up during the same session. So the patient is given 120 to 160 milligrams per session. Okay, can you go down, please? And this section, section E, is just the details of the person that you're presenting to Health Canada and asking for special access for this particular patient. So you need to present basically what you would present in a psychiatric history. So information about what the patient has tried, what kind of symptoms they have, what kind of dysfunction this has led to. And then a little bit of information about the medication that you're asking for, whether it's psilocybin or MDMA. Continue past. Yeah. So you usually, for this section B, you have to specify all the treatments that they've tried and failed. And if they haven't tried particular treatments, you have to say why they haven't tried them or why it's been inaccessible for this particular patient. So for PTSD, I usually use the APA clinical practice guidelines for the treatment of PTSD. And that recommends treating PTSD with cognitive behavioral therapy and possibly medications and possibly EMDR. And then this section C is information about why this medication is indicated for this particular disorder. So it looks at the randomized control trials or the clinical trials that have been done on this particular medication and how they've shown efficacy for the treatment of PTSD. And this is just for repeat patients, but it's not for patients when you're filling out the first application for them. And then this portion is the attestation portion. and it just requires a signature and your license number. And that's pretty much the complete SAP.
Monika, can you talk through, have there been any issues when you've been working with SAP? Have there been any pushback?
I haven't filled in very many SAPs for PTSD, for MDMA, but I filled in quite a few for psilocybin for the treatment of treatment-resistant depression. And there has been some pushback. Initially, they were asking why the patients hadn't received 2 different treatments in the past, specifically ECT and transcranial magnetic stimulation. I was able to make a case for ECT that it's not, the patient wasn't interested in undergoing this treatment because of the side effects associated with the treatment. And for the transcranial magnetic stimulation, it wasn't accessible for the particular patients that I was applying for because of the cost, as well as the difficulty with coming for daily treatments. But I haven't received a lot of other pushback. But I've never tried to fill in these applications on patients that haven't tried multiple antidepressants in the past.
I think we've lost Nick here. Yeah, so fortunately Nick has dropped off. He is working. He's unfortunately remote right now. He's on a delayed train. So I think perhaps now we can pass it over to Leora. Oh, there he's back. I think we can pass it over to Leora. And Leora, if you could perhaps discuss the sessions themselves, sort of the prep and the MDMA-assisted sessions that you've experienced thus far.
Sure, and I do want to say that I have just started working with MDMA. I have extensive experience with ketamine as a psychedelic, but MDMA has been the medication we've recently started, and we applied through special access, and we didn't get any pushback, but we were really rigorous in like listing every single medication, every admission, every treatment, and I think that was really important. We work in an outpatient clinic. It's a pain clinic, so there's an anesthetist and a nurse there as well. That is the setting. It's in downtown Toronto. And we started actually with a little bit of a smaller dose. We started with 80 milligrams, followed up by a 40 milligram dose about 90 minutes later. We've started working with 2 patients now. We do also have music, and the patients have noise canceling earphones, so where they can listen to the music while they're undergoing the treatment. And we also make sure that we do follow a lot of the things that MAPS does in terms of their study. So we do have things like pillows, blankets. Patients are dressed really comfortably. They have a bed that they can recline on or sit up on. We have make sure that they're drinking something like Gatorade. We have snacks towards the end of the session, because the sessions go pretty long. They're about 6 to 8 hours. The one thing that was new to me was that the onset is longer. So it does take about an hour before the MDMA kicks in. So, and patients are usually nervous. So being able to talk them through that and reassure them until that happens. We did a little bit of actually some guided relaxation, and that seemed to work really well. Once the MDMA hits, it's like the videos that MAPS has, if anyone's ever seen them. It's very much sort of like a wave experience. So often the first thing is patients will be listening to the music and sort of be focused inward. There's a lot of quiet where they can be quiet for up to an hour at a time, and they're focused inwards, focusing on whatever issues that they're trying to sort out. And then they will come out, sort of take the earphones off, and then talk about it and process it and explain what's been happening and looking for feedback, looking for direction. It's sort of like psychotherapy on steroids, like it's intense, but the patients really seem to get it. And then they'll go back in again, and be gone for a little while and come back out again. And the day proceeds a lot like that. And so far, it's early days, two things seem to happen. For one of my patients who has complex severe PTSD, who has never been able to tolerate even talking about her trauma, never mind her flashbacks, during the session, she actually had I would say two flashbacks where she had a memory that felt very real to her in real time. But the difference was she was actually able to tolerate it and not sort of decompensate. She was able to sort of work through it and talk through it and come out the other end and then sort of be okay. And then have a second episode like that later. And for this patient, that's remarkable, because part of the reason I think she's been treatment resistant is she couldn't even tolerate talking and processing the material. They've tried, even with the MDR, she would literally decompensate, and historically she would actually end up in hospital acutely suicidal. And the MDMA just seemed to make the intolerable tolerable and open for sort of psychotherapeutic engagement and intervention. The other thing that happens is people seem to go in and then sort of get insight on what's holding them back, or what's going on, or why, how connected to their trauma, what they need to do to change it. They sort of see a path forward. Now, both of my patients did not have sort of that warm, positive feeling in their first session. And for some people, that doesn't come until the second or third session. Both of them seem to have like sessions where there was a lot of work to be done, lots of difficult emotions to process. And both of them towards the end, like the come down was actually pretty soft. Like they didn't really, like people talk about sometimes having a hard come down, but because they were already working on difficult emotions, it was actually, I think, a soft landing, and they were in good shape at the end. The other thing I would say about this compared to, let's say, ketamine, is it's much less psychedelic. So they're very present in the room. They can get up, they go to the bathroom, they can eat, they can drink. They're really not so limited in terms of their body. They know where their body is. It all moves normally. So I say that would be the other difference. Unlike this study, our patients went home that night. They did have someone who took them home and who stayed with them overnight. And then the next morning we did the next session to integrate the experience. Both of those sessions went well. I will say one of those sessions happened virtually because the patient lived hours away and we couldn't organize anything else. And the virtual session went as well as the in-person. So in fact, for these sessions, we actually did have two therapists, myself and the patient's long-term therapist. And in the virtual one, we were like on 3 different locations and did it virtually, and it went fine. And we did check in with the patients every day, and we took turns doing that. And sometimes the check-in was done via text, and that actually went very well. I even had one of them, talk about some very difficult memories and process that all through text, because that was what was available to us technically at the time. We're still in process. In fact, we're doing another MDMA in treatment this coming up Tuesday. So I don't have a conclusion yet, but it definitely, the effect has been much more dramatic, certainly, than any medications we've tried. But I would say, at least in one case, much more immediately, obviously effective than ketamine. Both of these patients have also used ketamine. Yeah, I think that's all I will say there. I'm certainly open to questions if there are any.
Okay, thank you very much. Spencer, do you want to talk a little bit about your training program?
Yes, absolutely. So first of all, thank you very much for having me on the panel here. Darasil started a training program a number of years ago, I think about 3 or 4 years ago now, when psilocybin was first becoming available through the Section 56 and then later the Special Access Program. Our organization provides a didactic, experiential training program for psilocybin. We've been doing so for a number of years, but with the success of that training program and the number of SAP applications that have been approved for psilocybin, obviously when MDMA became available, we needed to look beyond psilocybin in a continuation of a core value of ours to be patient-centered at all times. If there's a patient for whom MDMA would be the more appropriate medication, such as I think as we've discussed in here, someone with PTSD, then we want to ensure that the healthcare professionals are able to use the appropriate substance to treat the underlying issue. And obviously there are complex cases of clients that may need both at some point. Regardless, that's up to the care provider. So we wanted to provide a training program that would meet the healthcare professionals and patients we're working with where they are. So recently, with the first couple SAPs that we were able to support, we also got approval to start a training program or launch a training program from our board. And that program, its first beta cohort, is set to launch early in the new year, hopefully about January or February. The training programs, as I said, with psilocybin has been incredibly successful, and it's touched on numerous different ways to treat psilocybin, both for end of life and major depressive or treatment-resistant major depressive disorder. So we've had to develop a new curriculum specifically to highlight MDMA, which I think for anyone who's done a lot of the reading on it is a very different experience for clients than psilocybin is. So this is almost an acknowledgement that the training will be quite different than the psilocybin training. And what we've approved is for those who have experience with our psilocybin training, the fundamentals to work their way from that program to the MDMA program, as MDMA is a little bit more complex, let's say, than psilocybin. It's a lot more therapy, again, as we've been hearing through this call. But even that may change in the future too, depending on the experience, qualifications of practitioners. So I'm just kind of communicating what we have for right now. And obviously this is going to develop quite a bit. I can speak to how the psilocybin training has changed. We started off with an experiential program that we believed was very important. We've been challenging the federal government in allowing continued experiential training with psilocybin through that program. And similarly here, we hope that we can also bring an MDMA experiential training program. We've got a approval now from IRB, and we had an approval from Health Canada. We've now had to reapprove because there were some changes that were made in IRB for a clinical trial with psilocybin, and we're reapplying for that also to be available for MDMA, because we believe that it's absolutely critical within any training program to give the healthcare practitioners access to the medication themselves, so it can be used in their own work. I think that's something that's evident in the research around MDMA and psilocybin. I believe MAPS USA actually has it as a requirement. I'm interested to see how they're able to, whether that's something we can bring up to Canada. And we are in conversations with MAPS USA right now. Obviously, the work that they've done around MDMA is fantastic, and we'd love to be able to provide their level of training. Whether or not that's possible, time will still have to tell, but regardless, we're committed to ensuring that clients who are accessing MDMA through the Special Access Program do have trained healthcare professionals that are going to be supporting them with that. So I'll just give a really, really quick overview of maybe the second part that I believe is quite important to this, and that is just training healthcare professionals in how to administer psilocybin or MDMA. MDMA in this case isn't always enough. As we've talked about, the SAP program in itself is inherently part of this entire process. So knowing how to set up a care team is almost as important as knowing how to provide the medication, because it's something that you cannot do by yourself, and that I don't think anyone would encourage you to do by yourself. The training teaches people how to build a prescriber therapist relationship along with a co-sitter, essentially all the skills or tools that you would need within your care team to deliver a safe and effective therapy. And in addition to, we also have some tools that you can use for the SAPs. So I think as Monika was showing the template for the SAP, we've also got a template that we're working on that we train people on how to use. I think it was I know we heard how there were some difficulties or differences, let's say, in applications. Some clients have tried a whole host of different treatments, while other clients, those treatments may not be suitable for them. They may not want to try some of them. An example being like ECT. You know, there is a way to get around this with the proper communication to the regulator. So sometimes having actually the pre-filled out form that specifically explains how you should be communicating the patient's desires, or let's say your clinical decisions on that paper is equally as important as filling it out. The regulator is not trying to stop anyone from accessing MDMA, but they do want to make sure that it's done right and that the client has reasonably denied or been contraindicated, or for whatever reason is not trying other treatments. So knowing how to do that is an essential part of the training as well. Just a little bit more on the size. The training we have is starting off with about 12 to 16 participants. In our experience, keeping training small is quite important to ensure that people have the necessary attention from the trainer. As I had mentioned, we're looking into experiential. We have two proposals that are moving forward right now, one with experiential, one without, and obviously there are some nuances to how we would make that possible. Some possibilities for access could be training in areas such as BC, where there is Section 56 for MDMA, but that also comes with its own unique challenges. So we're hoping that the clinical trial will provide a pathway, if not Section 56 from the government, that allows the practitioners to access training. Other than that, the training itself is going to be 3 days of didactic on top of the 5-day experiential training that we do, or 5-day psilocybin training, with those 2 days of experiential. Ingrid Pacey, one of Vericel's trainers, and a practicing who's been in private practice in Vancouver for 47 years, is going to be starting and launching the training program. We've had an amazing experience with Ingrid thus far. So if anyone's interested, they can head to the Vericel website to learn a little bit more. I'm just going to, in the chat here, paste where people can access that, if I can find the chat. There it is.
So Spencer, there's no chat just because this is a webinar. But oh nope, I think it went through. Well, I'm happy to make sure that all the participants get this via email after the fact.
Perfect. And the one last thing I'll mention too is that we do have a additional training for prescribers. So what's worked really well so far with the training program that we've had for psilocybin is having trainings that we encourage all prescribers to go through the full experiential and didactic training. But in many cases, a prescriber does have a significantly different role from the therapist in this treatment team. So we also have, in addition to this 3-day didactic and experiential training, a prescriber training. So anyone who's interested in learning what a prescriber might need to understand for both psilocybin and MDMA can also join a little bit of a smaller online training program that would allow them an insight into this process and their place in a treatment team. So we've got one coming up on October 16th. I'm sure in that program we'll have a lot to say about MDMA. So if there are any prescribers out there, be sure to check out our training page in the prescriber training. Also happy to answer any questions, but that's, I think, all I've got for now.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay, so if you have any questions, if you are a prescriber or a therapy provider, please feel free to put those into the Q&A chat right now. We're going to get to them in a moment. Before that, I'm going to ask our panelists a couple of questions because I also am always learning. And the first part of this discussion I'd like to come to is, we were talking before the call about the fact that this is a new sort of modality of care. This is relatively different from sort of what's out there today, including ketamine-assisted psychotherapy. And so, the psychiatry world is a little bit slow to adopt new ideas. I think we might be able to agree on that. I'll phrase it softly. do any of you have any thoughts on sort of the how this sector is growing, how difficult it is to sort of adapt to this new modality of care, and how patients respond to it?
I'm happy to jump in here and just provide maybe my my 2 cents of what I've seen from the advocacy side of things, and that is challenges among many healthcare professionals in actually navigating the bureaucracy, the pathways through special access program, and not being fully supported by, let's say, their colleges and all of the surrounding institutions that usually make care very easy. When I think of some of the biggest difficulties that maybe professionals are telling me that they're seeing, stigma is one of them among their peers, among colleges. Cost is one, that's not exactly easy to bill. And so these therapies, both, as we know, that the drug is one cost, but really the substantial cost is the therapeutic sessions around it. So that's another issue. And then, of course, the legality of it, these questions around regulations. What's my risk, right? What's my risk tolerance for something like this? Am I going to be supported by the college if something goes wrong? I think these are all gray areas for a lot of professionals, because when we look at, what's possible right now, or at least in our experience, what we're seeing is, for the indications, possibly 6 million Canadians are eligible for access through the special access program, but that is a stark contrast to the 150 that are actually using it. So between the number of Canadians who would qualify, and I think we all know a small percentage of that are actually using MDMA and psilocybin on the black market. So Canadians are already using this. They're going underground for care. That does not correlate with the small number of people accessing it through the special access program. So I think looking into those reasons of why, specifically around around cost, around the limitations of legality and regulatory issues and stigma, I think if we can look into those, we might find some answers that will allow more people to access it. Because I think the dream, or at least part of our mission, is ensuring that the thousands of clients that have messaged our organization looking for access at least have an opportunity to do so through a legal pathway, should them and their care professionals think that necessary.
I would want to say, I think at least in Ontario, I think the cost, and finding providers are the big rate limiting steps. I have to say, once I got special access approval to do the MDMA, I did check with the college, did check with the CMPA, and there was no problem. Like, basically the college just said, well, as long as you can demonstrate that you're qualified to prescribe this, and this is within your scope of practice, and here's a policy, make sure you read the alternative medicine policy, because that might also be relevant. And the same when I talked to the CMPA, they were really lovely. As long as I could demonstrate that I was up to date with the literature, that I'd had adequate training, that was in my scope of practice, that I was, had a protocol and was monitoring patients, and the patients gave informed, it felt pretty straightforward. There was no pushback, in fact, from that end. I think the hard part is it's expensive. We don't have a payment model for this, certainly not in Ontario. So you have to be very creative, or in some cases, I know people are charging privately. In one of my patients, the therapist was provided by a hospital, like a therapist who's on salary, who was given permission to do this because the calculation was made that it would be cheaper for them to do these days of therapy than this patient being in their acute crisis unit for weeks at a time. So that's how we got around some of the funding issues. But I think the funding and the stigma amongst clinicians are the two big ones. Patients seem open to it.
And just to highlight, I totally agree. It's perceived risk in many cases, not even real risk. If you're trained, you're absolutely right, and following your community practice and guidelines, the risk is minimal. And think fair to say you're probably taking on a lot more risk with many other treatments.
I
A
think
lot
so.
more risk. Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree.
Monica, any thoughts? Certainly, you know, I'd love to just double down a little bit on the cost element, because I think it is a huge rate limiting step in all of this. I think, Leora, your example of using the acute care therapist as part of your treatment model is a really interesting one, because at the very least, somebody in that hospital facility sort of sat down and functionally crunched the numbers and decided that it was appropriate, which is great to see, actually. Okay. Well, why don't we jump into the Monica? Unless you want to add something, we'll jump into the Q&A. I'll read these out one by one, and we can just take them together. First question is, curious as to whether there's any clarity around therapy approaches required to have been trialed for PTSD to have a successful SAP application. My experience with applications for psilocybin for TRD is that they have criteria that patients must have tried certain therapy approaches, for example, CBT, IPT, MBCT, etc. For example, do we know if a trial of EMDR is required? Any thoughts?
I don't think a trial of EMDR is required. I think you do have to demonstrate that they've had some form of cognitive behavioral therapy, whether that's cognitive processing therapy or prolonged exposure, which are kind of forms of cognitive behavioral therapy, particularly well suited to PTSD treatment. But I don't think you need to have said, I've done prolonged exposure and CPT and EMDR. I think you can just say one or the other.
And Leora, any thoughts from your end, or Spencer?
I was just going to totally back that up and say that, you know, as long as you have the right reasoning behind either contraindications or patients not being able to access or reasonably, choosing not to access it, as long as it's written correctly, I don't see those as being major issues. And of course, finding clients that have reasonably tried treatments too is important. I don't think it would ever make sense to try a substance that hasn't been through or completed its clinical trials and available with someone who hasn't tried the reasonable first round, either pharma and non-pharma options.
I agree.
Yeah, look, I would support that. I think the folks at SAP, I find that in the industry sometimes they get a bad rap, but they do really look at it holistically. Although I will just say, as I think Leora mentioned, very valuable to really closely document all the previous approaches tried with every patient and really make clear sort of the clinical history, because that is sort of, they do look at it holistically, but that is what they're looking for, is just sort of evidence that you've sort of done your due diligence there. I'll jump into the next question. MDMA medicine administration is about 8 hours in length. Do we find clients get hungry? Does it make sense to offer food throughout the day? What about offering 5-HTP or a serotonin for afterwards to help with the come down?
So I can answer the first part at least, which is they're not actually hungry, but you do have to encourage them to eat. They tend to get hungry later in the afternoon, if at all, but we do take a break for eating. And we do make sure they're hydrated and they're having something that has some calories and some nutrition in their drinks, like Gatorade. So yeah, you do have to monitor that stuff and make sure that they are because it's a long day. And generally, like, we recommend, we just have like some fruit, some cheese and crackers, some veggies and dip, or some hummus, something like that. And patients seem to really like that. They seem to all go for the fruit and the cheese so far, but I have a small N, so don't trust that. An N of two. An N of two, exactly. Anecdotal at this point. The come down hasn't been so bad yet. So, and often when I talk to the MAPS people, I've had some training with MAPS. It seems like you can talk people through it. You don't have to give them anything extra. I don't know, Monika, what your experience has been.
Well, I only have an N of 1, so not a very big experience, but certainly I don't think he was hungry throughout, but he was provided with access to refreshments and as well as certainly electrolyte solutions and whatnot to make sure that he stayed hydrated.
Was it come down okay?
Yeah, the come down was fine. He did present with some suicidal ideation close to the come down, and that resolved fairly quickly. And then once he was ready to go, he wasn't experiencing that at all, and he was able to be discharged safely in the care of his mom.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, next question. This is from Dr. Jill Betty, one of the researchers that we work with in Australia. Hello, Jill. Regarding self-experience for therapists as part of training, how do you manage therapists who might have medical or psychiatric contraindications and protect trainees against having to disclose their personal or family medical history during training? I think this is mostly for you, Spencer.
Absolutely. This is a question that we've been asking ourselves, our trainers, trainees since day one, right? The ethics of, is it right to force someone to take a drug in order to go through training? To which, we don't have a definitive answer, and we certainly don't force anyone to have an experiential session. I'm not sure, collectively, either as a society or profession, we understand yet if that's reasonable. Certainly, understanding someone with psychiatric contraindications, immediately no, right? That's not right at all. Protecting ourselves and trainees is the most important thing, just as protecting your clients are, and understanding those contraindications is a very important part of training. So to immediately contradict them and go through the actual session with contraindications, I don't think that would be right. So in many instances, I think there are other ways to gain experience with altered states of consciousness. We certainly have alternatives for people, such as cannabis circles, holotropic breath work, stuff like this, because we just can't say at this point in time that it's absolutely necessary. I think there are other ways to satisfy trainings. And although I can't at this point in time specifically say that, without going through it experientially, you're going to be trained, I think that's really a discussion between the trainee, trainer. And then as per disclosing, personal family medical history during training, I think the same kind of goes for it, being forced to do this. I don't think you can. I think it would just bring up, why, right? For what reasons, and be always dealt with on a case-by-case basis. So I don't think we're at a point yet where we can make broad strokes or determinations on exactly what might contraindicate or what reasons people may or may not take training. I can just say that I'm very interested in finding this out and seeing what not only the profession but also the regulators have to say about experiential and the necessity of taking it before actually going to treatment. Leora, I see you have some comments too.
I want to say a few things. One is, I think experiential training is very useful. I really highly recommend it. It really helps. And I think patients also find it reassuring. But it also helps because you know what to expect and you know how to speak the language and describe the experience, because it's often ineffable, which is hard to put into words. So I think as much as possible, if people can have experiential treatment, training, I would strongly recommend that. I also would say the psychedelic mental health world is different from sort of the traditional psychiatric world. It is much more mutually collaborative and supportive and open. And I think in part because people have had some experiential training and have it does shift things. It is a different culture, I think a better culture. I don't think you need to have experiential training or experience to be able to do the work like, not that's what I would say. I think your work is better, particularly if you're doing the psychotherapy component, is much more informed if you've had experiential, and like it is useful and great even for the therapist to try it. Like, it's definitely worth trying. It improves, I think it improves your quality of life as well as your ability to work in this field. That's all I would say.
That's great. Thank you. We've had a couple of questions on cost, which I will field. The first question is whether PharmAla offers any sort of discounts or compassionate provision of drug. The answer to that is yes, we do. It is done on a case-by-case basis. We are still a very small company, so trying to meet the needs of patients and the needs of us to continue making the drug is somewhat of a challenge, but we do, of course, try. The other question is, what is the pricing? So in Canada for SAP, PharmAla charges $500 through our distribution partner, it's Shaman Pharma, $500 per session for the drug product. We are always working to get those costs down for patients. So that is the answer to the pricing question. As with all of these treatments, I think the big challenge is therapist time. There's a lot of prep work that goes into it. There's a lot of time on the day, the experiential day, and of course there's integration afterwards. So I would argue that the drug is a relatively small part of the total package, but we are very cognizant of the fact that for a lot of these patients, they don't have the resources to pay out of pocket, and we're always trying to get those costs down for them. Would anybody else like to jump in? Leora, you look like you want to say something.
Nope.
Nope.
I agree with you.
Okay. Okay, last couple of questions here. Are
I'll
you
just
able
say-
to share? Oh yeah, go ahead.
I'll just say one other thing too that I think is worth noting. There are two instances that I'm aware of, there are probably far more out there, where a substantial part of the therapy has been covered. In Quebec, REMQ covered the cost of the therapeutic session for one of the doctors who is both a prescriber and a trained therapist providing treatment. I think it was a couple $1,000s, so quite substantial. Now that was with psilocybin, but I don't see any reason that they wouldn't similarly provide it for MDMA. Another instance is Pacific Blue Cross covering a veteran's treatment with psilocybin for about $3,000 worth of treatment. Now, can we replicate this? Can we continue to do this? I don't know. That's always going to be up to those insurers. But I think there are certainly cases where prescribers will be able to, write letters, recommend that their patient have this covered, and then I hope join in the exercise that we are doing right now, which is explaining that this is not, a drug. It's a drug therapy, and it's very important that both be covered, because I think there's a long history of covering the price of therapy or covering the prices of drug products, but never covering both. So the more and more professionals writing these exemptions, requesting, right, from their provinces, from insurance, from wherever, funding, the better, right? That's how we build momentum. And I'm sure we'll be exploring many avenues. If we continue to hear of anyone who's covering, we'll be sure to let everyone know, as that's one of the number one goals that we're trying to achieve is finding a way for this to be covered so that people go from the underground to the SAP. There needs to be some sort of incentive not to do it underground, where it is far cheaper.
I do think MAPS, the people who are working with the FDA to get this approved, are positioning it as a drug therapy. And it's the first time the FDA is approving a medication plus therapy as the treatment intervention, not just the therapy, not just the medication alone. So I would agree.
Absolutely. We have a question as to how many SAP applications have been approved with MDMA. From our perspective, and I believe we are the only provider currently manufacturing this drug in Canada, we have 25 approved, so 15 who have already received a drug product and 10 more who are sort of waiting in the wings for either the patient to be ready or the therapist to be ready to administer the treatment. And I will say that it does seem like the folks at SAP are getting faster and better at approving these in a very timely fashion. again, our friends at Health Canada get a bad rap sometimes, but they are always working to improve. And I do believe that they are getting faster at this. So we see a bit of an acceleration, both in terms of timelines and the number of applications that are going forward. And hopefully that continues. And then this one's for you, Spencer. Can you speak to any other training programs available right now for MDMA-assisted therapy in Canada?
Yeah, certainly. I know that Numinous is working on a program. I've heard that ATMA also has one. I'm curious as to the VIU program as well. I haven't heard specifically whether it's MDMA or psilocybin. It might just be psychedelic therapy. So, I would encourage anyone looking into, doing training to do their homework, look through each of them, weigh the advantages, pros and cons of each. And in addition, there are also, I think, trainings in the US that some people have been interested in, right? MAPS training, CIIS. So there are lots of places to go to training.
I got my training in the States. They have some good programs. I went through IPI.
I went through IPI as well.
Yeah.
Sounds like IPI is the winner. Okay, last question here is regarding our Indigenous communities here in Canada. So there's another cost question. For many First Nations people, therapist time is covered. Is this a population where they may be a low cost or free access to MDMA, as drug costs could remain a significant barrier? So this is a very interesting question, actually. So I happen to be, my specialization actually is regulatory and administrative law. There is a possibility for First Nations under the First Nations health plan to get coverage for SAP medications. I don't believe there have been any submissions yet, but the way that these programs are structured, because they're both federal, there is a mechanism to apply for drug cost reimbursement under that healthcare plan. It's just not something that anybody has explored yet, but there shouldn't be any reason why it's not possible. So something that one of the other things that we do with our time at PharmAla is I'm the board chair of PsyCan, which is the trade association of psychedelic medicine companies in Canada. And we are actually going to be going to Ottawa in about 3 weeks to talk to the federal government about issues just like this one. So hopefully we can get some more clarity on reimbursement for folks in our First Nations communities relatively soon. And I think that's all for questions, and we're right on time. So I will just close by thanking all of our participants. Thank you so much for giving of your time and talking about your experiences with this new modality of care, with this new program, with the availability of MDMA through special access here in Canada. Really appreciate you doing them. Thank you.
Thank you very much.